Welcome to the webinar on Ulladulla Shipbuilding and Shipwrecks 1830 to 1860, a History Week New South Wales event. I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to the elders past and present. My name's Kathy Dunn and I'm from both Ulladulla Info and Australian History Research. Shipbuilding was one of the first industries based here on the south coast. In the 1840s, Ulladulla was described with several handsome vessels that had been built on the beach, entirely from produce of our local woods, being the cedar, and of course with the masts for the ships being imported from New Zealand. So there was a lot of maritime activity happening down at the harbour. The South Coast enjoys a rich coastal environment and a maritime and nautical heritage. Ulladulla's first commercial venture was the harvesting and the shipping of cedar in the late 1820s and 1830s from the Kendall land holdings along Narrawally Creek, north of Milton. Ulladulla Harbour is one of the oldest on the New South Wales coast. The harbour is sometimes called Ulladulla or Ulladulla, and it also refers to the entire district. Ulladulla was first surveyed in 1827 by Thomas Florence, who also surveyed the land for his future father-in-law, the Reverend Thomas Kendall. And we still have descendants of Reverend Thomas Kendall who still live in the district today. On his land, he started the cedar cutting, which was being shipped to Sydney. And then when the Warden brothers arrived, it was used locally for shipping. Ulladulla refers to the entire district, not just the harbour itself. The harbour area was actually called Boat Harbour. Shipbuilding commenced back in 1835 on the foreshores with David Warden and Robert Gee. The shipwrights Warden and Gee also owned many of the land allotments on the foreshore and were later joined by David's younger brother, James Warden, after Gee moved to Sydney in about 1847. We have Warden's Head today, and that is where the Ulladulla Lighthouse, its second location, is, and it's up on Warden's Head. And it is actually named after the two Warden brothers. Both Warden brothers were very much involved in the area of education, religion, local government, and others. And they did much to encourage settlement by granting timber cutters and farm labourers free passage and 3 months of rations upon their arrival. Extensive research has shown at no time did Warden and Gee or the Warden brothers ever have assigned convict labourers working on their shipyard at Ulladulla. In 1837, the harbour is described as one of the best on the coast. It is sheltered from every wind except the nor'easter, and on the south of the bay there is a natural wharf. That natural wharf is where the middle pier or middle wharf is today, and that was actually built in the early 1870s for £12,000. Today it would cost about $1 million. And shipping was quite a productive trade. There were ships going to Jervis Bay, Ulladulla, Browley, going further down the coast to Twofold Bay or Eden, and also Pambula. And we have the Gypsy here, and this was actually built by the Warden brothers, and it was for the South Coast trade. But it just wasn't food and produce coming into the port and also leaving the port. The farmers at Milton and Woodstock and Crubia needed Ulladulla to actually ship their produce to Sydney and other locations. But the ships also brought people to the area, and many of the pioneer families, most of the pioneer families, actually first came to Ulladulla by ship. There's a vast amount of records describing all the shipbuilding and the early activities of Ulladulla, and this one here was written in 1848, and it describes how the shipbuilders of Sydney could actually learn a lesson or two from the Warden brothers here in Ulladulla. There's said to be about 12 to 14 ships that were built in the 1830s to the 1860s here in Ulladulla. And we don't know the name of every single ship, but there's the Swan, the Croquet, the Ocean Queen, the Gypsy, we mentioned that before, the Lucy, the Jenny Dean, and also her sister ship, the Fancy, and the final ship was actually the Jane Lockhart. By that time, the brothers had a dispute, and it seems the dispute was actually over the wages that they were paying to the ship's carpenters, the blacksmith, because of their tarring skills, to actually line the boats with. Jenny D drifted ashore near Browley in October 1851 on her way to Browley. All the crew was saved, but she did eventually go down in Queensland later on. As I said before, the Jane Lockhart, the schooner, was wrecked also in Queensland in 1868. There's a newspaper report that by 1866, the Ulladulla shipyard on the foreshore had fallen into disrepute, with the Jane Lockhart being the last vessel built. So one is actually using newspaper reports, registrations of ships in regards to collecting all the information. The image here is actually from a model boat builder who did a lot of research and study on the Gypsy, and he even wrote a book about the Gypsy, which of course includes the building of the ship, its materials, and it was built specifically for the South Coast trade. So it went to Sydney, came back, and dropped off all the goods and produce and provisions. So it was a trading ship. And yes, it also did bring passengers. David Warden, who was a master shipwright, and he actually arrived here in Ulladulla in the 1830s. He was also postmaster at Ulladulla from 1852 to 1864, while still operating his shipbuilding business with his brother James. David was appointed the first mayor with the establishment of Ulladulla Council in 1874. James Warden learnt his trade as a shipbuilder in Scotland. He first travelled to Australia and arriving in Hobart. He then joined his brother here in Ulladulla, travelling via Sydney on the Caroline in 1843. And James Warden ended up being a member of the New South Wales Legislative Assembly, so he was our state member. There is a known sketch of James Warden. However, there's no known image at this stage of his older brother, David Warden. What about the shipwrecks in the waters of Ulladulla. We have the Brisbane, which was shipwrecked in 1832. It really wasn't at Ulladulla. It was near the mouth of Jervis Bay, but it was travelling from Ulladulla to Sydney with cedar, cheese and other sundry items. And it is on that ship that caused the drowning and the death of Reverend Thomas Kendall and all other crew members, which the exact numbers are not known. In 1844, the brig William was travelling from Hobart to Sydney, and it struck a reef off Ulladulla and got off, leaking severely, and landed several passengers eventually at Boydtown before continuing down to Hobart. We have the Susan, which was actually built in the Hawkesbury River in 1840 with a cargo of tallows and hides travelling from Bermagui to Sydney when she struck the South Bombing or the South Bombora in July 1849, and the ship went to pieces in 10 minutes. There were 7 people aboard and no lives were lost. In 1850, a ship that was lost ashore during a storm sometime in June 1850. They don't know exactly when it was wrecked, but the wreckage was actually found washed up on the beaches of Ulladulla, and there were no traces of any bodies were discovered. In 1851, the Jenny Dean that was built by the Warden brothers in 1850. It drifted ashore near Browley on her way from Browley to Sydney. All the crew were saved and she refloated. The Jenny Deans was eventually wrecked at Green Island in Queensland in 1863. And of course, she was the sister schooner to the Fancy, which was also owned by David Warden of Ulladulla. In 1851, the Currency Lass, which had been built up at the Brisbane waters. In 1851, the ship was washed up against the Bombora, which is also called Sutherland's Reef, which is just outside the entrance to the harbour. All crew were saved on that case. Then in 1864, we have another shipwreck, this time down at Marmarang Beach, and no lives were lost. And of course, today we do have the wonderful Sea Rescue who look after the waters of Ulladulla. So after the shipbuilding closed down, the 2 Warden brothers built their homesteads, both at Milton, one Airlie House, the other one Bullgutta House, and from there they stayed involved very much in the local community. They were very big landowners. They bought land and they sold land for a very quick profit and good profit too. So there was a lot of wheeling and dealing with their assets. There's lots of historical information available in regards to the shipbuilding and the early shipping of Ulladulla. There's been books written. I myself have written Triumphs and Tragedies at Sea, Shipbuildings and Shipwrecks. You can go down to Ulladulla Library. There's quite a few books there. And you can also search the internet and the National Library, and some of the earlier books, say Richard Cambridge, Captain Cook's Pigeon House and Early South Coast Explorers. It has been digitised and is available to actually download. If you've got any questions on shipbuilding, the Warden brothers, etc., just post a comment on the video and we'll answer them for you. There's also a Facebook group on Facebook called The History of the Milton Ulladulla, and you're more than welcome to join that, and I will put a link to that Facebook group in at the end of this video. Thank you, everyone. Take care.